are here. What's going on, guys? Welcome to this week's episode of the Lopes Goes Last podcast. I, of course, am your host, Tyler Lopes. Thank you so much for joining me this week. If you have not subscribed yet, please feel free to do so and also hit that bell icon so that you never miss any one of my videos. Also, like the video if you like what you see or what you hear, and also share this video with your family and friends so we can help this thing grow. I wanted to take a second before I began the podcast and kind of talk about the kind of week that my wife and I have had. And I got the coronavirus. I got the Rona. So it has been a tough week for both me and my wife, of course. I would not recommend it to anybody if I had to put that out there. But I wanted to get this out for you guys. I wanted to get this video out, even though obviously it's been a bit of a tough week for the wife and I, but I will say that I've learned a lot about the kind of people that my wife and I are this week. I wanted to just say this, put this out in public. We've taken great care of each other. Her more so taking care of me, but it's just been a great week, and I'm very blessed to have a great structure around me when it came to that. But obviously Monday of last week, I recorded my podcast for Friday. I recorded all the videos. And for those of you who did see the full podcast at the very beginning, you probably would have heard me say that I had some allergies going on. And at that point, that is really all it was. And I do apologize. You're probably going to see some hard cuts, or you're going to hear me kind of throughout different points in this. And I do apologize for that. I know it's not the sexiest thing in the world to hear, but you know, I'm doing the best I can here. It is a little tough. But anyways, I wanted to just kind of say, Monday, obviously I recorded, and I said that I had allergies, and that's all it really felt like it was at that point. Just kind of weather changes here in South Carolina. Had kind of a weird throat thing going on, just kind of itchy, scratchy, not really painful or anything. But definitely was showing some signs, and then that night, after I was done recording, I went to bed, didn't sleep all night, shivering, while sweating, just, everything that you imagine COVID being, I got, and it hit me like a freight train. And, I woke up that morning, or I say I woke up, I didn't sleep, but, I got up out of bed, that morning and had a 102-degree fever. Certainly not ideal. Ended up getting a few tests. Ended up that I had it. So, it is what it is at this point. I wanted to do something for you guys. And, when you have COVID, and especially as bad as I got it, I'm still feeling quite crummy, and it's 9 days later. So, this is a pretty severe case, I would say. Maybe not by comparison to a lot of people. I'm obviously very lucky. There's been people that have died from this, and certainly feel very lucky that I do have most of my health with me, and I still feel okay enough to do this, which is better than a lot of people can say when they've had this. So I'm very lucky with that. But again, barely being able to get out of bed for the last 10 days, and just been tough. But things are good. The wife is a lot better than she was before. She's a lot more able to kind of, get up, walk around, do stuff than I am. Not all the way there, obviously, but, still just kind of working things out. But I wanted to just talk to you guys about that really quickly to begin the video, just to kind of tell you guys, why there hasn't been clips, all the fatigue. I don't know if you guys know this, or have done anything like this before, but it takes a lot of research, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of writing to do this podcast, or any podcast, really. I admire guys, like Rich Eisen, that, go and do podcasts every day, and talk for an hour and a half or an hour every day. It's truly inspiring. It really is. And, it does, because it does take so much work. And, when you're down for the count like I was, it's a little hard to find motivation to do that when you can barely stay awake or barely open your eyes, and when you're feeling as bad as I was feeling, and in a way still am feeling. But I wanted to just talk to you guys about that really quickly. But I did, again, want to get this out to you guys because this is a big week in sports, and I wanted to do something for you guys. So just bear with me. I'm really hoping that next week it'll get back to normal. But for right now, this is the best that I honestly feel that I can do. And again, if I haven't mentioned it already, you will probably see some hard cuts. I know I said this last week, and there weren't very many, I don't think. I think it was only one or two. But this week, you probably will see some. I'm going to have to cough. I'm going to have to drink water. I'm going to have to do something. So just please bear with me as I try to recover and as I try to get back to normal, or at least some semblance of being normal. And thank you again for those who have contacted me during this time and checked in on me and checked in on my wife and making sure that we are all right. Everything is good. We are doing okay. We're getting better, but not all the way there yet. So just wanted to talk to you guys about that really quick. But with that being said, I just wanted to I want to jump right in. I want to get to some stuff, and this is a really crazy day because there's been a lot of developments in the world, especially of football, just today that I didn't really have time to add to my notes. So I'm excited to just kind of give my take on it with, just kind of off the dome, off the top of the head, and just see how it goes. But right now, I do want to start with last weekend's games, the championship games for the NFL playoffs, starting with Bengals and Chiefs. The Bengals beat the Chiefs. Sure, yeah. I mean, I guess, right? The Bengals did win 27-24 on Sunday afternoon. I was very wrong about this one, and a lot of people were, right? I don't recall a lot of people really picking the Bengals to win this one, because why would you? The Bengals, yeah, they did beat the Chiefs earlier in the season, but, it was at home. It was in Cincinnati. I do believe it was anyway. I could be wrong about that, but, it was a close game. The Bengals came back from down a lot in that game as well. It was just one of those things where you kind of look at it as like a bad day for the Chiefs. But otherwise, the Chiefs had been dominating pretty much all the second half of the season, and now all of a sudden they are no longer in the playoffs. But in terms of this game, the first half, it looked like I was going to be right. Everybody that picked the Chiefs was going to be right. It was a laugher first half. At one point, it was 21-3, and then in the second half, apparently, and this is all rumor and speculation, apparently one of the Bengals team attendants, just kind of like an intern type person, was walking around the stadium and happened to stumble upon the Chiefs off switch. And so he obviously hit that when nobody was looking, and then the Chiefs ended up making a huge comeback and won in overtime. Obviously I'm kidding. The Bengals did play very, very well in the second half, no doubt about it. And I got to give it to their defense. They made some great adjustments at halftime. They really started playing well. And you know what? I got to give credit where credit is due. I have given the Bengals offensive line a lot of crap over the first couple of podcasts, and they played about as well as you can in this scenario. Obviously the Chiefs defense isn't they're not world beaters or anything like that. They were bottom third of the league statistically this year, but only 1 sack as compared to 9 sacks last week. Obviously, it's a huge step in the right direction for them. They played very, very well. Again, I've given them a lot of crap, but they did play really, really well in this one, so I did want to mention that. But to me, this one's on the Chiefs. It's not on the Bengals. This one is completely on the Chiefs. Again, the Bengals deserve a lot of credit. They're the one that had to make the comeback. Obviously, they're the ones that had to score the points. They're the ones that had to make the stops. They're the ones that had to call the right plays and do all that. But this one, to me, is on the Chiefs. I mean, what happened? Like, what happened? I know that the Bengals are a very good team. Don't get me wrong. But if you're the Chiefs, you just dropped 42 on the Bills. And again, I don't like to, harp on it a lot, excuse me. But the Bills had the number 1 defense statistically in the league this year. The Bengals defense in pretty much every single way is not as dangerous, not as deep, not as talented as the Bills defense is. Even without Tre'Davious White, if you're the Bills, the Bengals are still not as good. To me, not even close. You took the Bills and you destroyed them. I mean, destroyed them offensively. And quite frankly, you made it look easy at times. And yet the Bengals are the ones that figure you out? The Bengals? Eli Apple and Mike Hilton are the guys that stopped your weapons? They're the ones that stopped Tyreek Hill? They're the ones that stopped Mecole Hardman? Really? I mean, it was bizarre. And, obviously, I made the joke about a Bengals attendant, finding the Chiefs off switch and flipping it. But, and obviously, that's not how that works at all. But, I mean, honestly, that's what it seemed like at times, to me anyway. The Chiefs went from being completely unstoppable, not just against the Bills, but again, in the first half of this game, it was 21-3. They scored every time they touched the ball at one point to open up the game. And they were going to score again at the end of the half. Obviously, it didn't end up happening. And man, what a different game that would have been had they, at least gotten a field goal to end the half. But it didn't. They went from looking unstoppable to looking like they did in week 8. Like that. Just with no, it seemed like it just happened in a matter of seconds. They had absolutely no answers on offense in the second half, only scoring 3 points in the second half in overtime. Crazy stuff. Crazy stuff. But, again, congrats to the Bengals. The Chiefs blew it for sure, but, again, congrats to the Bengals. They were the better team on Sunday. And, they're making their first Super Bowl in over 30 years. Joe Burrow is indeed that dude. Joe Burrow is exactly the quarterback that not only the Bengals need, but I think the NFL needs right now. And, they figured out a way to win, which at the end of the day, in the playoffs, is really all you can ask for. So, again, congrats to the Bengals. Now, moving on to the NFC Championship game. This game ended with the Rams beating the 49ers 20-17. This was another really fun game to watch. The Rams were down 17-7 at one point, so both winners, making pretty big comebacks in their championship games, and they ended up pulling it out. They sealed the game with a Jimmy G interception on some kind of attempted shuffle pass when he was trying to get out of a sack. And, I kind of feel bad for Jimmy G. I really do. He did the best that he could in this one. He actually played pretty well a lot of the time in this game. The Rams defense is really good. They have a lot of talent. He made some nice plays, but obviously, it's hard for me to imagine Jimmy G being in a 49ers uniform past this season. I think we've seen the last of Jimmy Garoppolo as a 49er, and honestly, it's also hard for me to imagine somebody else paying him to be a starter. I'm not saying it can't happen. Obviously, there might be some teams that are desperate enough to get somebody in there, then they don't have a young quarterback. Like, maybe the Panthers can't draft a quarterback or end up not being able to draft a quarterback. Whatever the case may be, they might bring him in for a year or two. But I just don't see him making the money he's making now. I don't see any team trying to pay him $25-30 million to be a starter. Again, he may end up starting somewhere, but I think his days as a consistent starter are done. And I think he knows it. I think he knows it too. He was pretty emotional after the game, pretty emotional in the press conferences, and I think it's because he knows. I think he knows that his time is running out. But man, the 49ers defense gave Matt Stafford fits. I mean, they gave Matthew Stafford a hard time, and they would have been a wrecking crew if they had made it to the Super Bowl. So props to those guys, but obviously, they're going home, and Matthew Stafford and the Rams, they're gonna, Matthew Stafford's gonna have a chance to win his first Super Bowl, and so awesome. I'm really excited to see, two teams that, they never make deep playoff runs. I mean, the Bengals haven't won, before this year, hadn't really won a playoff game in Lord knows how long. And, the Rams, obviously, this is the first time that they're really relevant since the Greatest Show on Turf in the early 2000s. So, back when they were in St. Louis with Kurt Warner, Torrey Holt, and those guys, Marshall Faulk, a lot of guys, that were really great back then. But this is the first time they're relevant since those days. So, I'm really excited to see that. And as far as the Super Bowl goes, who I think is going to win, I'm going to pick the Rams. I think the Bengals, they've proved me wrong over and over and over again. But at the same time, I'm very stubborn and I don't learn my lesson and I don't plan on starting now. But No, but seriously, the Chiefs were a juggernaut, but their defense was again bottom third in the league this year overall, whereas the Rams are arguably the best. I mean, they're definitely among the best. They weren't number one statistically, but they just got a bunch of players on that team that are really, really good at the top of their game. I don't see the offensive line for the Bengals holding up in this one, although that hasn't stopped them in the past. Obviously, again when with giving up 9 sacks to the Titans, but I just think that the difference between the Rams and the Titans is the Rams actually have DBs back there that are going to be able to hold up even with the pass rush. So. And that's something that the Titans just really didn't have. They didn't have that greatest secondary. And again, also, I don't know if C.J. Uzomah is going to be ready. There's been some good news out of that camp in terms of his injury. Obviously, he left, I believe, early in the second quarter of that game against the Chiefs. Stud tight end for the Bengals. And again, the Bengals seem to be encouraged with his opening diagnosis. But again, I don't know if he is going to be ready. He might not. And if he isn't ready, that's a huge blow to the Bengals. He's really a security blanket for Joe Burrow, and he has been all year long. He's really stepped up this year. And plus, I just want to see Stafford finally win one. I mean, after everything he's gone through in Detroit and all the haters and everybody saying he can't win the big one, he's definitely proven most of them wrong, but there's still going to be guys that to say he can't win the big one if he doesn't pull through in the Super Bowl, and I just want him to finally get that for himself. So, call me old-fashioned, but I think defense wins championships, and if I'm picking the Rams or the Bengals defense played really well against the Chiefs, so they are no slouches for sure, but I am picking the Rams. So, with that, I wanted to move on and talk about Tom Brady. It's been a whirlwind week with Tom Brady, hasn't it? For those of you guys who know, earlier this week, the report came out that Tom Brady was retiring. That report was corroborated by Adam Schefter and Jeff Darlington, two very reliable sources for the NFL. But obviously, it took a little bit of time, and then, Tom Brady kind of came out a couple days later and said he actually hadn't really decided yet whether he was retiring or not. And then yesterday, as of this recording, so that would be Tuesday, I believe that was the 1st of February, should have been the day that I'm thinking of. Excuse me. But he did officially announce his retirement. So Tom Brady is now, at least according to himself, officially retired from the NFL. Man, I mean, that is crazy. I came out publicly on this podcast and I said I didn't think he would retire. Obviously, Tom Brady had different plans. And, in a lot of ways, I'm not ready for it. I'm not ready to have it. Obviously, last week, David Ortiz got into the Hall of Fame, my favorite baseball player of all time. We'll talk about that a little bit later, so get ready for that. But obviously just kind of stunning to me that Brady would announce his retirement right now. I love Tom Brady. I always will love Tom Brady. I will always be a huge fan of his. And I am just so grateful for everything that Tom Brady has given me over the years. He's taught me that anybody can accomplish their dreams, and he taught me to never give up and never stop fighting, just to never stop going after your dreams. So thank you, Tom. Crazy couple of years for football fans. You lose Drew Brees, now you lose Ben Roethlisberger, and now you lose the GOAT. And to me, obviously there's no doubt about it. Tom Brady's the greatest of all time, at least football-wise. It's hard to step up to Jordan in terms of the greatest athlete of all time, and that's its own separate debate. But as far as football players go, there's no one that's ever been like Tom Brady. There's no one that ever will be like Tom Brady, and I'm just so grateful for him and his career and everything that he has done for me in my life as a lifelong Patriots fan. I got the privilege as a 24-year-old to watch him from the time I was a little kid. To watch him turn a franchise around and make it something that I don't think even the owners and the coaches imagined it could be. I know it's hard to believe for a lot of the people that are going to watch this podcast. But the people, like my mom and my dad will attest to this. The Patriots were not always the juggernaut that they were, or that they are now. Arguably, again, still are. But they were kind of one of the laughing stocks of the NFL for a long time. They weren't very good. They ended up making it to a Super Bowl in '85. And anybody who knows even just an inkling about football has heard of the '85 Bears. Might be the best defense of all time. The Patriots are the poor suckers that had to get slaughtered by them in the Super Bowl. So definitely tough to see that. They also ended up going to the Super Bowl against the Packers and Brett Favre. I can't remember exactly what year that was, but they got killed in that one too. So the Patriots hadn't done a darn thing up until the year 2000, and then obviously Tom Brady rolls around, 199th pick in the draft, and the rest is history. 7 Super Bowls for him, 6 Super Bowls for the Patriots later, and the Patriots are what they are now, in large part because of the stewardship and the aggression and just the absolute competitive fire of Tom Brady. And I'll never forget a lot of the amazing moments. I remember just a quick, sidebar. This isn't necessarily a Tom Brady memory, but it is a Patriots fan memory. Back in 2011, the Patriots had a pretty good team. I wasn't sure they were going to win the Super Bowl that year. So this is 2011, so this is about 10 years ago now, 10 plus years. I'm 14, 15 at this point, whatever it is. There was a game. They were playing the Baltimore Ravens in New England. Ray Lewis, Ed Reed, Joe Flacco, a bunch of great players over there. And then the crazy ending to that game, Lee Evans, former Buffalo Bill, now playing for the Ravens, caught the game-winning touchdown for the Ravens, but Sterling Moore of the Patriots just able to sneak a hand in there after he's trying to tiptoe out of bounds, I should say tiptoe inbounds, and knocked the ball out. And the Patriots were up by 3 at this point. And as time is ticking down, the Ravens now have to kick a field goal and try and get in overtime. And I was watching this in my parents' bedroom with my dad, and I think my mom was there as well. I can't exactly remember, but I know my dad was there for sure. And, I was sitting on the edge of the bed, knowing that the guy was going to make the field goal and the game was going to go into overtime. And poor Billy Cundiff is probably never going to hear the end of it, but he did not make the field goal. And it was as it pertains to field goals, it was a pretty much a chip shot. I think it was like a 38-yarder or something along those lines, but hard to remember now. But it was an easier field goal than, it wasn't like a 55-yarder or something like that. And he shanked it, and I was so happy. I was so excited. I ran out of my parents' bedroom, yelling, "He missed it!" And I ran, and in the there was kind of like a playroom out in the open by our stairs in my old house in Florida, and there was an air hockey table there, and I decided that it would be a great idea to try and do a front flip over the hockey table, and it did not work out well. I hit my head. It was not good, and I hurt myself. Not too seriously, though, just some scrapes, but, I was just so excited. We're going back to the Super Bowl, and it's just I have countless memories like that Tom Brady is at least partially responsible for. Obviously, watching, sorry again, Falcons fans, but Super Bowl 51, just amazing. I mean, he's given me so many memories, and I don't know if I will ever be more grateful for an athlete than I am of Tom Brady. And I'm going to miss him. I'm going to miss, being able to watch him play football because, and let me say this, guys, obviously as a Patriots fan, it's hard to be unbiased when it comes to Tom Brady because he brought me and my team so many memories. But there has been a lot of great quarterbacking over the last 10 to 20 years, guys. I mean, just so many fantastic quarterbacks. And it's honestly unprecedented how many great quarterbacks there have been in such a short period of time. And as far as I'm concerned, Tom Brady is the best of all of them. And I know that there's a lot of people that really hate Tom Brady and really just, whether you think he's a cheater, whether you think he just isn't a good human being, whether you just don't like whatever the case is, there's a lot of people that don't like him, and that's fine. You have every right to that opinion. You have every right to not like him. You have every right to not like the Patriots. That's not what I'm getting at. What I don't understand is the people that just don't think Tom Brady's good, and that just, that don't think Tom Brady is one of the greatest of all time. I think he is the greatest of all time. That is an argument that I will never understand. Guys, he's won more Super Bowls than any team has ever won. Not any player. He has won more than any player has. By 2. But he has won more Super Bowls than any franchise has won. I mean, how you can't say he's a great quarterback, and you can blame all of that, or you can credit all of that, I guess, to the people around him. But man, Tom Brady, there's never going to be another Tom Brady, guys. And I hope that you got to appreciate it even a fraction as much as I got to, because you will never see anything like it again. And if you do, then we will all witness something that is miraculous, because there has never been anyone like Tom Brady in any sport, and I don't think there ever will be. So I hope you guys got to appreciate that. Even just a little bit as much as I did. But I want to kind of talk about what went on with this story a little bit and just kind of dive into it. I talked a little bit earlier about how Adam Schefter came out with this. He actually dropped the story during one of the championship games on this past Sunday, and obviously Tom Brady didn't announce his official retirement until Tuesday. So why did Adam Schefter drop this story? And I will say, when I saw the headline on this past Sunday, I was a little shocked. I was like, really? Already? Because, it had only been a week or so since Tom Brady's last game, and I figured he'd take a little bit longer than that, and I didn't anticipate him making the decision as early, even when he did, which was obviously on this past Tuesday. But nonetheless, I was very shocked on Sunday. And obviously, Adam Schefter, it seemed like he jumped the gun. And this isn't the first time that Adam Schefter has jumped the gun with a story like this. Last year on draft day, on NFL draft day, he dropped a story about Aaron Rodgers and how Aaron Rodgers was so fed up with the Packers and how they'd been treating him that he's told some people in the organization that, he didn't want to play for the Packers anymore. He dropped that again on draft day. It's a very important day for all these NFL prospects. Up to that point in their lives, obviously you hope that it's not the most important day of their lives in the end, because, you want all of them. You wish all of them the most success they could possibly have. You want them all to win 20 Super Bowls and everything like that. Obviously, if you're a fan of a specific team, maybe you don't want, maybe if you're a Georgia fan, you don't want guys like Jalen Waddle or somebody to be really successful because you don't like Alabama. But whatever the case is, for the most part, you want them all to succeed. But up to this point, it is the most important day of their lives. And, Adam Schefter kind of threw a wrench into all of that with that story. And he went on, a few podcasts and, tried to defend himself. And he was basically just asked, like, was there anything that, specifically dropped on that day, or anybody told you something specifically on that day that that made you drop that then specifically? And he said that no, nothing came through on that day. It was just, quote unquote, an accumulation of evidence, and he decided to drop it on draft day because he knew that a lot of people would see it. And obviously, I'm not the biggest fan of that. I don't really like the fact that happened, and it seems like something similar happened again here. Adam Schefter wanted to be the first guy to say that Tom Brady was retiring, even before Tom himself had said that. So, you kind of question the sources a little bit. And then obviously, just with the Aaron Rodgers story, I mean, he played for the Packers this past year. So whatever the sources that Adam Schefter used, obviously they weren't true, or at least not completely true to where Aaron Rodgers wanted out of there. He obviously didn't want out of there bad enough. Obviously, he stuck around. But, you know, there have now been several prominent YouTubers that have talked about this kind of happening over and over again with Adam Schefter. And they've said a lot of very harsh things about him. And I don't really want to do that necessarily. And I'm not going to do that. You know, I don't know nearly enough about the job. I don't know nearly enough about the sources that he used, why he did, you know, I don't know nearly enough about that stuff to make a harsh claim about Adam Schefter or his ego or any of that kind of stuff that the other YouTubers talked about. And, you know, again, they have every right to their opinion, and I agree with some of the stuff that they said in a lot of ways. But, you know, I don't want to be the person that's coming out here saying that Adam Schefter's a bum or anything like that. I don't think he is. Adam Schefter is a great reporter. He has been for years. He's very reliable. You know, he's very knowledgeable. And so, I still feel like he's one of the best in the business. You know, however, again, I will say, Tom Brady deserves to be the one to announce his own retirement. I mean, the guy gave 22 years to the game. He gave everything. He gave his life to it. I mean, leave the guy alone. Let him be the one that announces it. It shouldn't matter about the clicks. It shouldn't matter about being the first one. You know, Brady deserves to make his decision on his own time, which now he has. And, you know, again, it would have looked awfully silly if Tom Brady had decided to stay. Obviously, that didn't happen. But, you know, imagine if that did happen. You know, Adam Schefter would have looked pretty silly as far as I'm concerned. And also, to me, you know, if you're Adam Schefter, you know, this might just be a minority opinion. I don't know. But I will say this. For me, as just a normal consumer, maybe even a little bit above normal consumer, obviously, as I kind of do this as not necessarily a living, but I'd like to do it as a living maybe someday. And, you know, I do this for fun. I do this every week, and I want to keep doing it. And just kind of using these news stories to kind of benefit me. You know, as somebody that also does that and is not just some generic day-to-day consumer of these articles, you know, I know that when Adam Schefter drops a story, it is a credible story, or at least it should be a credible story if Adam Schefter, or like Adrian Wojnarowski if you're talking about the NBA, or formerly Ken Rosenthal from the MLB. You know, when I see those names attached to an article, I know that there is a lot of merit to it. And for me, specifically, you know, I would rather Adam Schefter be completely correct than be first. Because I could see an article written by 25, 30 different people. You know, I could see it all over the place. I could see it on Twitter, YouTube, ESPN, whatever the case may be. And I'm going to sit there and go, well, I see all this, but Adam Schefter hasn't reported on it yet, so until he does, I'm not sure how much I believe it. And then when he finally does, I'm going to believe it. And to me, I think that's more important. I think it's more important to be right than it is to be first. Now, obviously, you know, I don't know the game. I don't know the industry like Adam Schefter does. Maybe it is way more important to be first in terms of clicks or in terms of money or whatever the case may be. And if that is the case, maybe we need to revisit how we look at reporters as an industry. But, you know, for me, again, I think that it's more important to be right than it is to be first. And I think that most people would probably agree with that. You know, I think that most people would rather somebody be right than somebody be first. But let me know what you guys think about that. If you have any opinions on that, I'd love to hear about it in the comment section below. And now, you know, I want to move on to a couple of stories that came out today, right before I am recording this. So this is really fun. You know, not well. Let me rephrase that. Some of it's fun, some of it's a little bit sad, a little bit depressing, and a little bit, you know, not necessarily unnecessary, but, you know, I feel like it should be unnecessary. I don't think it should come to this, but for those of you who have not heard, former NFL head coach Brian Flores was formerly the head coach of the Miami Dolphins, was the former defensive coordinator for the New England Patriots. Back a few years ago, or at the very least, he was the linebackers coach. I can't remember exactly. I do think he was defensive coordinator at one point for the Patriots, but definitely head coach of the Miami Dolphins the last few seasons. Didn't have a great first season with the Dolphins in terms of record, but 2 years ago in 2019 led the Dolphins to a 10-6 record, and then last year started off the year 1-7. They won their first game of the year against the Patriots, then dropped 7 in a row, and then immediately won 7 in a row, becoming the first team in NFL history to do that. First team to ever to lose 7 straight and then immediately win 7 straight in the same season. So certainly a huge turnaround. They did not end up making the playoffs. They won 8 of their last 9 games, however, and Brian Flores was a huge reason for that, but the Miami Dolphins still decided to part ways with him, citing that he rubbed a lot of people in the ownership and in the higher-ups the wrong way. Certainly, they had a lot of arguments or whatever the case may be. They disagreed on the future. Came out that it seemed like Brian Flores was not a big believer of Tua Tagovailoa, and he wanted to trade Tua Tagovailoa for Deshaun Watson, quarterback of the Houston Texans, who is kind of going through a lot of legal issues right now. But and that was part of it. The brass and the ownership believed in Tua. Brian Flores didn't. That's kind of one of the things that came out. But now Brian Flores is suing the NFL and also suing 3 teams. Those 3 teams being the Miami Dolphins, for one. Another one being the New York Giants, and the third team being the Denver Broncos. And the reason he is suing, there's many reasons, but the main reason cited in this lawsuit, it's a class action lawsuit, and the main reason being that he believes that he was kind of subject to racism and racist practices in terms of the hiring process for coaches. Now, again, this is a very new news story by the time I am recording this. There may be more to talk about in terms of it next week. We will see, but as of right now, details keep kind of pouring in as the day goes along. I have to admit, when I first saw this, I didn't really know how to think about it. I'm not somebody that, obviously, in terms of racism and in terms of racial issues in America, I might not be the most qualified to talk about it. Being a white male and everything like that, I obviously haven't been a part of things like that that I could really speak about. But I will say that my first instinct is always to look in the mirror when something doesn't go right for me. And so when this first came out, I was almost a little frustrated because I have a lot of respect for Brian Flores. I think he's a fantastic coach. I didn't understand, and a lot of people didn't understand why the Miami Dolphins fired him, even if he wasn't necessarily getting along with the ownership. I thought that he's a fantastic coach, and I saw him again close up in New England. I saw how great he was. I saw how much the players respected him, and I saw how much the players respected him in Miami. And quite frankly, they're not world beaters over there in Miami. I mean, they're not the Chiefs. They're not the Bills. They don't have a crazy amount of talent on both sides of the ball. They have some talented players for sure, but they definitely don't have the level of talent that a Cincinnati or a Kansas City or a Buffalo or a Los Angeles or a Green Bay has. But they still are a very successful team, and they are pains to play pretty much for every team. So, again, a lot of respect for Brian Flores, but for me, looking at that story initially, I was like, man, you gonna call people racist now? Like, is that really what this has come to? You weren't hired because of racism. Like, that was my first instinct. And then, right, wrong, or indifferent, that was my first instinct when I read the story. But as more details have come out, and more specifics that Brian Flores has put in his lawsuit have come out, it seems more and more to me like he's got a legitimate case. And if that is what's really happening, then that is just shame. Like, are we really still stuck in a time loop where racism is okay in the NFL or anywhere, really? I mean, it's sad. It's sad to see if that is the case. Obviously, for those who don't know, there is a rule in the NFL in terms of hiring coaches and general managers and presidents and stuff like that, where, you have to now interview at least two minority candidates for all of your coaching positions that are vacated or that are open. And, I think that I can understand why the Rooney Rule is in place, but I think stories like this are a reason why the Rooney Rule needs to be looked at and amended or even abolished. And I'll tell you why, because, here are just a few of the details that have come out throughout the day in terms of what Brian Flores is alleging against the NFL. So, again, like I said, Brian Flores was fired from the Miami Dolphins despite being very successful. And he is alleging that because he was successful, that is why he got fired. Now, if that doesn't make much sense to you, certainly doesn't make much sense to me either, and I'm sure it doesn't make much sense to Brian Flores. But what he is alleging is that the owner of the Miami Dolphins, whose name is completely escaping me, but he actually, on multiple occasions, told Brian Flores during the season to hop on a plane and go take a vacation to clear his mind after wins. Never mind losses, after wins. And, that's just not something that you do as a coach. You don't leave in the middle of the season to go on vacation. Like, that's not what you do. At least if you're a respectable coach, you don't just leave your team, even if it's just for a few days. You don't do that. He also told Brian Flores that and again, this is all allegedly, there's no necessarily evidence to prove this yet, but that's what the lawsuit is for. It's what Brian Flores is alleging in his lawsuit. He's alleging that the owner of the Dolphins also offered him $100,000 for every game that he lost. Not won, lost. And the reason for that is because the owner wanted better draft positioning in the NFL draft. So, obviously Brian Flores was like, nope, I'm not doing that. That's ridiculous. I'm a football coach. I'm here to win, and I'm going to do my very best to win with what you give me. Now, I will say that does explain some of the moves that the Dolphins have made over the last couple of years where you kind of just scratch your head and go, why? Why would you get rid of this person? Why would you, bring in this person as if you're winning now, but then you cut this person as if you're not winning now and you're trying to rebuild and save money and all that jazz. So, that does kind of explain a lot of those things. But, obviously, if that is the case, then the owner of the Miami Dolphins should be booted out of the NFL. He's not worthy of owning a team if that's the case. Obviously, again, there's nothing concrete to go off of. There's no reason why I should believe either side right now. But obviously, that's what Brian Flores, is alleging happened with the Miami Dolphins. He's also alleging that they tried to tamper with players. There was a story, and again, they didn't name the player. They didn't name any of that kind of stuff, at least from the sources that I saw. But there was a story that Brian Flores told that, the owner of the Miami Dolphins wanted Brian Flores, before the draft, to meet with a player who was not yet a free agent, and try to court him to come to Miami when he does become a free agent, which obviously is not legal. You are not allowed to do that. But Brian Flores said, I'm not doing that. That's tampering. That's illegal. I'm not going to do that. And so the owner said, okay, well, separate note, I'm inviting you on my boat this weekend. Let's go, on the boat and we'll have a nice time. Brian Flores was like, okay, I can get down with that. Sounds nice. And then when he got on the boat, he saw the player that the owner wanted Brian Flores to talk about also on the boat with the owner, trying to kind of, backdoor that whole conversation. And when Brian Flores saw that, he alleges that he immediately left, did not participate in any of those kind of things. But again, those are just a few of the things that he's alleging the Miami Dolphins did. He is also, again, suing the New York Giants, and this one is a wild story. So basically what happened, the way that Brian Flores describes it, he actually uses text messages. I didn't see the text messages until a couple of hours ago. I was just kind of going off of what they said the text messages said, so I was a little confused on the whole thing. But now I have a better understanding of it, and I will let you guys in on it as well. So essentially, if you have not seen what happened there, so Brian Flores was interviewing to become the next head coach of the New York Giants, who just fired Joe Judge, who actually was on the same coaching staff as Brian Flores at one point with the New England Patriots, but I digress. Again, he was interviewing for that job. And Brian Dabble, offensive coordinator of the Buffalo Bills, was also interviewing for that job. And, on Monday, Brian Flores was supposed to interview for that job. And before he even interviews, or I should say, excuse me, I misspoke. On Thursday, he was supposed to interview for that job, but these text messages happened on Monday. My apologies, I messed up those details. But so a few days before any of these text messages surfaced, he was supposed to interview. And so Bill Belichick, head coach of the New England Patriots, modern day Vince Lombardi, modern day, one of the greatest coaches of all time, a modern day Tom Landry, amazing coach. And also, again, former head coach, Brian Flores was the former coordinator for Bill Belichick and the Patriots. So they obviously have a great relationship with each other. Bill Belichick texted him, again, this is a few days before Brian Flores is supposed to interview. He said, "Congratulations on becoming the next head coach of the New York Giants." And Brian Flores, of course, was like, huh? I haven't interviewed yet. I'm supposed to interview on Thursday. It is not Thursday. But I hope I get it. And again, this is all in text messages. You can look it up yourselves if you want to see the actual text messages. I am, of course, paraphrasing them. And Bill Belichick said, "Well, I heard out of Buffalo and I heard out of New York Giants camp that you're the next head coach. Brian Flores is the next head coach of the Giants, and it's your job. So congratulations." And Brian Flores, he wasn't counting his chickens before they hatched. He said, "Hey, I hope you're right. I hope I get it. I hope I do well. Blah blah blah, all that stuff." And then Brian Flores started to kind of put the pieces together. He goes, "Wait a minute, out of Buffalo, Brian Daboll's also interviewing for this job. Maybe Bill Belichick's got a little confused here." So he texted him back and said, "Hey, Bill, are you sure you got the right Brian here? Are you sure you're talking to the right person?" And then Bill Belichick texted back, "Oh my goodness, I have done messed up, Aaron. I have messed up. It actually is Brian Daboll that they're hiring to be the next head coach. I'm very sorry." He said some colorful language that I won't repeat. I messed things up. He didn't say messed up, but obviously, I messed up. My apologies. Now, obviously, this is not Brian Flores. At least to me, it doesn't seem like Brian Flores is trying to incriminate Bill Belichick on anything. Bill Belichick didn't do anything wrong. It's not his fault that people told him something. And he also, it is a little silly that he messed up the Bryans. But, that happens. It is what it is. But the most important thing to kind of understand here is that Brian Flores had not yet interviewed for the job. And it seemed like they had already announced that Brian Daboll was going to be the next head coach of the New York Giants, and yet they were still interviewing Brian Flores. Now, you're asking me maybe, why would the New York Giants still be interviewing Brian Flores when they already picked their head coach? For those of you who do not know, Brian Flores is an African-American man. He's black. And as I said earlier in the podcast, the Rooney Rule for the NFL requires teams to interview multiple minority candidates regardless of anything else going on for their head coaching or any other coaching vacancies. So, in his class action lawsuit, Brian Flores is alleging that the New York Giants never had any intention of hiring him as their head coach and simply only interviewed him to check a box and to check a quota of interviewing a black man, and had no reason to bring him in other than that. They had no plans to hire him. And if that is the case, that is really sad. That is really sad. But again, I can't say I understand it because it's stupid. Everybody should have a chance no matter what to interview. And if you're going to bring somebody in, don't waste their time. As somebody who's interviewing for jobs right now, trust me, I don't want anybody to waste my time in interviews. I want them to tell me exactly what's going on. I want them to tell me exactly what the pay is going to be, what the hours are going to be, what the responsibility is going to be, what the culture of the company is like. I want to know all that up front so I can make my decision as best I can. And I cannot imagine the crazy amount of pressure on top of that being an NFL head coach would be. That you'd probably want to know everything that's going on. Am I going to be able to hire my coordinators? How much influence am I going to have of picking players? All that stuff. How much leeway am I going to have in terms of playbook? Like all that stuff. I'd want to know all that up front. And obviously Brian Flores felt like he didn't get a fair shake. And if that is true, then it is really just sad and disgusting to do. And he's also alleging, again, he's suing the Denver Broncos for very similar things that he's suing the New York Giants for. Obviously, they brought him in, felt like they had absolutely no intention of hiring him. In fact, he actually says that John Elway, who is the president of the Denver Broncos, and also several other brass members of the Denver Broncos that were in charge of hiring, Brian Flores waited for them for over an hour for the interview. They showed up an hour and a half late, and he also alleges that he believes that they were hungover, that they had gone out drinking, and that they had forgotten about the interview, again, because they had no intention of ever hiring him in the first place. And so, he's suing those teams over the hiring practices, also suing the Dolphins over just kind of illegal and shady stuff going on. So that's kind of everything that we know at this point, or at least that I can remember at this point that I've seen up to the time of this recording. There might be some more details that come out in the next few days, and if that's the case, then I'd love to update you guys next week. But that's all I know right now. Certainly not a great situation for the NFL. And I got to hand it to Brian Flores. That is a bold thing to do, especially since apparently he had other interviews going on the day he dropped the lawsuit. And he forfeited those interviews willingly to, do this lawsuit, or at the very least was willing to not have those interviews. I don't know if he gave them up willingly. I guess that's a bit of a stretch. He might have tried to, salvage those interviews and say, I still want to interview despite the fact that I'm suing. And if that's the case, then, good. That takes a lot of guts to do that, but certainly does take a lot of guts to stand up for what you believe in. And right, wrong, or indifferent, I'm never gonna hate on somebody for standing up for what they believe in. And if there is all this stuff going on, and there is still racism in the hiring practices, obviously, it doesn't help that every single owner of an NFL franchise is white. If that is the case, and there is some still racist practices going on, then that should be dealt with. That shouldn't be the case. I mean, I don't understand why we can't just all treat each other like we're humans and not just treat each other differently because of the color of skin. I don't understand why, but that is the case sometimes, unfortunately. And if that is the case, it should be stomped out. People should be fired. Things should change. And I hope that they get to the bottom of it if that is the case. And now I'd like to move on to Tough Talk. Again, I said this is going to be a bit of an abridged podcast. It looks like it actually might not be, and I might end up going the normal hour and a half that I had, but that's fine. Certainly feel good enough to do that, and I'm going to keep on doing that. And I wanted to talk today about something that is, it's tough to talk about. It's something that, it's not easy, but I want to do it anyway. Let's talk about the MLB Hall of Fame. So, last week, the MLB Hall of Fame class of 2022 was announced, and David Ortiz became a first ballot Hall of Famer. And his, again, first time on the ballot. He received just over 77% of the votes. You do need 75% of the vote to make it to the Hall of Fame, for those of you who do not know that. And again, became a first ballot Hall of Famer. And this gives me just such great, profound joy. I mean, David Ortiz, for those of you who do not know, is my favorite baseball player of all time. Not just my favorite baseball player of all time, but he is one of my heroes, and he's one of the people that inspired me and was one of the inspirations to have the career in baseball that I had all the way through my senior year of college. He was a huge inspiration for me. And I have so many childhood memories that David Ortiz was a part of. I remember first Red Sox jersey I ever got, David Ortiz hit a walk-off home run, I believe in Game 3 or Game 4 of the 2004 ALDS against the Angels. Hit it into the monster, and it was just a great moment. I couldn't have been more than, this is 2004, so I was probably 7. I was just jumping up and down for joy in the living room. I probably shouldn't have been up that late, but it is what it is. I saw that, and my mom gave me, right when he did that, she gave me my first jersey, and it was a David Ortiz jersey, and it was just awesome. I have so many memories like that. I used to have a giant fat head of David Ortiz in my bedroom, and I would see it. It was, if I'm laying here, it was right there on the wall. right when I woke up every morning, there's just a giant fat head of David Ortiz. Again, as creepy as that sounds, from the time I was like 11 all the way up until I was in college, I had that. So, when he retired, he put out these bats, only select commemorative bats, a select amount, maybe like a few hundred or so, whatever it was. And my mom immediately bought one for me because she knew how much it would mean to me. I still have it. And to this day, it still may be the greatest gift I've ever gotten. I mean, it's just, that bat means so much to me. David Ortiz means so much to me. I got the privilege to see one of David Ortiz's last regular season games back in August of 2016 against the Rays in Tampa. He didn't really do much, but I still got to see him one more time before he retired in person. Again, David Ortiz means the world to me. And so to see him be a first ballot Hall of Famer, I mean, it's so awesome. It's so great. It's like a childlike happiness that I feel for it. And I know better than most how good he was because I got to see, obviously if you're not a fan of the Red Sox, you probably didn't watch the Red Sox every day or a lot of the days of the year. And I did. I watched a lot of Red Sox games. And I got to watch him every day and his greatness. And I know that he 100,000% deserves being a first ballot Hall of Famer. He's amazing. And again, nothing but pure joy and happiness for him being a first ballot Hall of Famer. But unfortunately, there is nothing perfect in this world. And with all the happiness and joy that I got watching David Ortiz's reaction to being inducted, obviously seeing all of that, despite all of the joy that brought me, it was immediately followed up by, oh man, did anybody else get in? And unfortunately, the answer was no. Somehow, the answer was no. I don't know how that happened. And I've been putting off talking about this for several weeks. I had a few opportunities to talk about this before the actual Hall of Fame voting because, and I put it off because, one, I was hoping I wouldn't have to have this conversation because I was hoping that writers would be better than this. I was hoping that people would be better than this, but unfortunately, it didn't happen. And it is something that is a little divisive, or actually not even a little divisive. It's pretty divisive for a lot of people. And it's something that a lot of people disagree on. It's something that, there's so many different point of views that you can have. And so many different ideas that float around on how to fix it or what to do. And it all pertains to one question, which is, should the BBWAA allow people who took PEDs or cheated the game in some way to make it into the Hall of Fame? That is the question that I want to explore today. Now, again, this is by no means an easy topic to discuss, right? There's so many factors to consider, so many sides that could be taken. And you could feasibly come up with an entirely new and different argument for each individual person that comes up. And it would totally make sense to do that. Or you could have the same exact blanket argument for every single person, and it would also make perfect sense. So, there may never be a one specific answer that kind of completely encompasses everyone's opinion and what everyone thinks. There may not be an answer that anyone can come up with that everyone would be happy with. But I am going to try. And I'm going to try my best to give some ideas that people may be able to come together and believe in. And, before I say anything else, I do want to say this. I'm going to fail. I know I just said I want to bring everybody together. I'm not gonna. There's gonna be things that people, there's gonna be certain people that believe certain things about what I have to say, and not everybody's gonna agree with me. And there is a specific type of person that I know will not agree with me with what I have to say, and that is what people in the business call absolutionists. Now, an absolutionist, what that means, it's basically a person who believes that anybody who cheated the game in any way, no matter when they did it, how much they did it, how severe it was, whatever the case may be, no matter what you did, if you cheated the game at all, you should not be allowed in the Hall of Fame, bar none. It does not matter how good you are. It does not matter how important you were to the game. You are not allowed in if you cheated in any way, shape, or form. If you are that kind of person, if you are an absolutionist, you will not like what I have to say. Or at least you probably won't like what I have to say. Let me put it that way. Again, and that's okay. You are absolutely entitled to that opinion. And part of me agrees with you. I never cheated in any way. I was never somebody that, cut the baseball or used sticky stuff or used, sun lotion or any of that stuff to help with baseballs, when I pitched or when I played. I never did any of those kind of things. I knew people who did. I knew people who wanted to have advantages like that. And again, I never took part in any of those kinds of things because I believed it was wrong. And I believed that, I wouldn't be able to sleep as well at night if I did stuff like that. So I do completely understand that opinion, that you believe that it shouldn't be. I completely understand. And you have every right to have that opinion. You have every right to voice that opinion. You have every right to fight for that opinion, just like I'm fighting for mine. And I wanted to say that before I continued, because it is true. You have every right to have it, and you have every right to voice that opinion. But I will say that, though, if you are that kind of person, if you are an absolutionist and you believe that no matter what you did, if you cheated the game, you shouldn't be allowed in, then you should also be focusing your energy on getting Bud Selig out of the Hall of Fame. Because Bud Selig, for those of you who don't know, was the commissioner of baseball in the 90s and early 2000s during the steroid era. He's the one who turned an eye the other direction to that. He's the one who turned a blind eye to all that stuff and did not punish players for that during that time. And yet he is indeed in the Hall of Fame, despite letting the steroid era happen. So, by the logic of people who think that no matter what, you shouldn't be allowed in the Hall of Fame, why do I not see anybody fighting that? I've seen people who want steroid era people in the Hall of Fame bring up the argument that Bud Selig's already in there, so why not? But not the other way around. Why do I not see that? And, I think that a lot of hardcore absolutionists won't be pleased with anything that I'm going to have to say, because, spoiler, some people who cheated the game are going to get into the Hall of Fame with stuff that I have to say. So, they're probably not going to really have a lot of pleasure with what I have to say. They're not going to really enjoy it. But I think that they are very pleased with how voting has gone so far, because obviously the BBWAA in large part agrees with these writers, the writers do agree with these absolutionists, or at least enough of them do to keep people out of the Hall of Fame. As I said, 75% of writers have to vote for you to be in the Hall of Fame. And it doesn't matter how close you are. If you don't get 75%, you're out of luck. And so enough writers are, clinging to the idea that these people who did steroids or cheated the game in some way should not be allowed in the Hall of Fame no matter what, that, it's working. They're not getting into the Hall of Fame. And this all, of course, comes on the heels of Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens not making it into the Hall of Fame on their 10th and final year of the ballot. You are only eligible for 10 years on the Hall of Fame ballot. And that, again, happened just last week. David Ortiz gets in. First ballot Hall of Famer. Amazing. But at the same time, you got other guys that I think should have been in the Hall of Fame that did not get in and that will never get in. And, for those of you who may not necessarily know what I'm talking about, I want to just take a second to give a little bit of context to this discussion, because obviously, my baseball people, what I'm talking about, or at least you should know what I'm talking about, at least partially know what I'm getting at. But there's a lot of people that, may watch this that are not super familiar with how the Baseball Hall of Fame works, or how the steroid era worked, or anything that I'm talking about in terms of who Barry Bonds, maybe they've heard of them, but they don't really know what Barry Bonds and what Roger Clemens meant to the game or anything. So I just want to take a minute to just kind of give some context to those people. So, both Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens, they were dominant players of their time. I mean, but unfortunately, they both allegedly did take part in what was known as the steroid era. Steroid era, it was a scandal. It was a giant, and again, they called it an era because it was a multi-year thing that ran through the league, ran through Major League Baseball in the late 90s and in the early 2000s, and possibly even a little bit before that. And I do literally mean league-wide. I mean, there were hundreds and hundreds of players that at least allegedly did steroids during this time, and maybe even hundreds more that did it but got away with it or are not suspected of it, whatever the case may be. And, we're never going to really truly know how many people during this time did steroids. But again, I think it's fair to say hundreds were doing it. And the reason that I say that Bonds and Clemens allegedly took part in this era is because during this time, like I said, Bud Selig turned a blind eye to it. And what I mean by that is despite the fact that the PEDs in general were banned in 1991, players were not tested or punished for these things until after 2004. So from 1991 to 2004, despite the fact that PEDs were banned, you weren't tested for it and you weren't punished for it. And the reason is because, actually, you know what? I'm getting ahead of myself. I want to kind of just try and stay on track in terms of Bonds and Clemens. So, despite the fact that PEDs were banned in 1991, and Clemens and Bonds, they never tested positive. They never took tests for it, really. So you can't really necessarily give evidence in terms of like, yep, Barry Bonds tested positive on April 19th, 2002. Like, what? You can't produce that. However, it is pretty clear. It's pretty clear that Clemens and Bonds both used PEDs during their time. Clemens, due to many eyewitness accounts, people saying that they saw him do it, and obviously, they found that he, was committed perjury. He lied in front of Congress. And Barry Bonds, because, by the end of his career, he was no longer this skinny beanpole of a kid that he was in his early 20s, but by his 40s, he was basically one giant chest muscle with a bat sticking out of it. By the end of his career. So, obviously I think it's pretty clear just as on the eyeball test that they probably took place, or that they probably took part. I don't know why I keep saying took part in the steroid era. And, others on the ballot, like Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa, Gary Sheffield, guys like that, and even current guys that are on there, like I mentioned, Gary Sheffield, like Manny Ramirez, like Alex Rodriguez, guys like that. All of those guys are people that have allegedly took steroids during their time, and some have actually been proven. And they're all being negatively affected by their choices. And of course, what I mean by that is they are not allowed as of yet in the Hall of Fame. And they probably, given the fact that Clemens and Bonds didn't get in, I think that means that none of them are ever going to get in. And that is exactly what I wanted to talk about today. But now that I've given my non-baseball fans some context, why am I talking about all of this? Why does it matter so much to me that I have to kind of put this out there? And the reason is because I think that the BBWAA is setting a really dangerous precedent. And this is what I stopped myself from saying earlier. I felt like I was getting ahead of myself, and I want to mention this now. I think that they're setting a dangerous and unfair precedent. And that dangerous, unfair precedent is that none of these people will ever get into the Hall of Fame, ever. Now, before I go on, I have a few things I want to clear up. Before I move any further in this discussion, any further in this diatribe, I guess, I want to make something clear. I completely understand the opinion that fans and writers have that these people should not be in the Hall of Fame. I completely understand that. I understand that there's people that believe that no one who cheated should be allowed in the Hall of Fame. And again, I've said this earlier, but I partially agree with you. Many of the writers that are voting for the Hall of Fame were former players. And all of them, as far as I know anyway, were clean. They never cheated. So I can understand the personal bias that they probably have towards these people, knowing that they could have done the same thing themselves, but chose not to out of integrity for the game. So, I'm also not saying that I feel that everyone who was good that cheated should be in the Hall of Fame. I don't believe that, actually. I think that a guy like Alex Rodriguez should never be in the Hall of Fame. And I'm going to explain why here in a minute. But for now, I just wanted to make those two things clear. That I understand the point of view that the writers and fans have that no one should be in the Hall of Fame. And I definitely do not believe that every person who cheated should be in the Hall of Fame. So with those things cleared up, those things in mind, let's get into it. And as much as people don't like to admit it, as much as I wish it didn't happen, as much as other people wish it didn't happen, the steroid era is a part of history. It is a part of baseball. It happened. It's not a secret. It's not something no one knows about. It's not something that, was kept a secret until like a couple years ago. No. It was known. Again, Bud Selig, Commissioner of Baseball, turned a blind eye to steroid use in the 90s and 2000s. Why he did that was because in 1994, and I think I mentioned this a little bit in last week's podcast, the players went on strike in 1994 in the MLB. They stopped right in the middle of the season, ended up having to cancel the World Series because, they wanted more money and they wanted more, leverage in free agency and they wanted all that kind of stuff. And I'm not going to get into it exactly what they wanted, but the point is that fans were really, really upset with players at this point. After 1994, the ratings for baseball took a real big hit. Fans were not willing to pay their own money for selfish players and selfish owners and what have you. They were not willing to do that, or at least not as much. So all of a sudden, you've got these guys that are taking steroids like Barry Bonds, like Mark McGwire, or not Barry Bonds, excuse me, like Sammy Sosa. Those are not the same people. Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire, big roided out meatheads, just smashing baseballs 500 feet. And fans are loving it. Fans are starting to tune back into the games. Now, as far as Bud Selig was concerned, his hands were tied. He's thinking, what do? I can't lose these players because if I do, I'm going to lose ratings and I might completely lose MLB. I might completely lose the game of baseball. Baseball is America's pastime. I can't let baseball die. So instead, Bud Selig chose to simply ignore it and let them do it without being punished because he needed them. As much as we may not agree with it, baseball might not be around anymore if it wasn't for the steroid era. Guys like Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa wouldn't have existed had it not been for the steroid era. So, again, he let it go. And again, I said earlier that I understand that those who think that no one should be allowed in the Hall of Fame who cheated, I understand that point of view. However, again, Bud Selig's in the Hall of Fame already. He's already in there. So you already don't have what you want. You already don't have everyone involved in the steroid era not in the Hall of Fame. Your commissioner at that time is already there. Also, players like Jeff Bagwell, players like Ivan Rodriguez, or Pudge, as I will refer to him in this in this as we go along. They have similar, albeit less prominent, accusations against them for steroids. They're in similar spots as Bonds and Clemens, although they never went to court or anything like that. They were accused of taking steroids because they played during that era as well, and they never tested positive because they were not tested. Or when testing happened, they never had a negative test or a positive test, whatever the case may be. They never had a test where they ended up being caught for any kind of PEDs. But they're in the Hall of Fame. And the cherry on top is that David Ortiz, allegedly, in a study done in 2003, his name was one of the names dropped to say that they tested positive for steroids in 2003. And this is before Big Papi became Big Papi. He really started becoming Big Papi in 2004. But David Ortiz spent his whole career from 2004, when he was Big Papi, until he retired in 2016. His whole career during that era when they were doing testing and they were punishing players, and plenty of players were punished during those 12 years, and he never had a positive test. But, again, he allegedly tested positive in 2003. So is that enough? He's in the Hall of Fame. He was just a first ballot Hall of Famer. His story is pretty similar to Bonds and Clemens. Bonds and Clemens never had technically a positive test. David Ortiz maybe even did have a positive test. He's in the Hall of Fame. He's a first ballot Hall of Famer. So for absolutionist, you're never going to get a complete blanket, you're never going to get that complete blanket coverage of nobody getting in the Hall of Fame that you're looking for. Because it already hasn't happened. And yet, the BBWAA writers, which by the way stands for Baseball Writer Association of America, just so you're aware, they're acting like they haven't let anybody into the Hall of Fame yet that was a part of the steroid era, or that took steroids, or that cheated in some kind of way. That's what they're acting like. They're acting like they haven't already let people in with sketchy histories. And to me, it's pretty clear that there's no real plan, and that the writers are simply just deciding which players get into the Hall of Fame based off of like a personal bias against the specific player, because either they didn't like them as a person or whatever the case may be. And they're not taking their statistics or what they meant to baseball into account. They're just simply saying, these guys acted like this, or these guys did this. So even though they have the same case as these guys were nicer. So I'm going to put them in the Hall and not you. And I don't think that that's okay. I think it's dangerous. I think it's irresponsible. And I think it's a disservice to the Hall of Fame. I really do. Now, again, you may think that none of these people should be in the Hall of Fame, and you have every right to that. But if they already are, if there already are people in the Hall of Fame, then you have to at least be willing to make it fair on all sides. Because it's already happened. Now, again, I don't think everybody who is Hall of Fame worthy that did steroids should be in the Hall of Fame. And I don't think that everybody who just cheated the game in some way, maybe that didn't even take steroids, such as a Pete Rose, I don't think everybody like that deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. And I will say this, I used to believe that Pete Rose should be in the Hall of Fame. I thought that, but as I've gotten older, and I actually don't think he should. And the reason is because he did something illegal that he knew was illegal. So he should not be in the Hall of Fame because of that. But nonetheless, I digress. So I am going to give you guys some ideas. Now, these ideas are probably not original. All right, I spent a lot of time thinking about them, but I'm sure other people have come up with, at the very least, similar ideas, similar systems to this. But you know what? I am going to try to put my own kind of spin on it, give my own take on it, and try my very best to please as many people as I possibly can and bring as many ideas into the forefront as I possibly can. But again, spoiler alert, if you're an absolutionist, you're not going to like these. Some people who took steroids are going to be in the Hall of Fame. I'm just going to warn you now. So if you're not a fan of that, if you don't agree with that, I'm sorry, but that's how it's going to be. Also, I do understand that Bonds and Clemens technically cannot get into the Hall of Fame anymore, but for simplicity's sake in terms of explaining, I would like everybody to pretend that they do have one more year, or that they are just still eligible for a long period of time to be in the Hall of Fame, because, spoiler again, I think they each should get in, and I'm going to explain why. Okay, so, again, here are my ideas. I'd love to have more discussions about this with you guys in the comments section below, or on Twitter or anything like that, so feel free to talk to me about this stuff, but here we go. Number 1. Create a steroid-era section of the Hall of Fame and put everyone with Hall of Fame credentials that took steroids during this era in this specific wing of the Hall of Fame. That's my first idea. And by the way, these are all separate ideas. They do not work in conjunction with one another, or at least they're not intended to work in conjunction with one another. So these are all just different ideas. So it's not like this is a step-by-step process or anything like that. So again, I'll say it again. Create a steroid era section of the Hall of Fame and put everyone with Hall of Fame credentials that took steroids during this era into this specific Hall of Fame. Or, excuse me, into this specific wing of the Hall of Fame. Now, I think that this could work because this way you're not simply ignoring the entire era of baseball as if it didn't happen. And also, you can keep guys that are already there and you don't have to worry about, taking Bud Selig or somebody like that out of the Hall of Fame. Simply just move them into this wing of the Hall of Fame. I'm sure somebody can figure out how to do that. And now that means that guys like Bonds, Clemens, McGwire, Sosa, all those guys, they can get into the Hall of Fame, but they are in the steroid wing of the Hall of Fame, so they still kind of have that, that stench about them. But I also think that this definitely won't ever work. So, some idea, right? I already am discounting it completely from working, but it's probably my least favorite of the ideas that I'm going to talk about here. My reasoning for that is, I think there are people that probably don't deserve to be in the Hall of Fame that would get in here. Because, it's just a blanket kind of thing. Everybody that had Hall of Fame credentials gets in. Doesn't matter about anything else. I think that it can, it kind of discounts modern day sluggers and the challenges that they had to face, such as better pitching, but also on the other side, it kind of discounts, other people that didn't take steroids that kind of cheated the game. I don't think it really encompasses everything for the problem with the Hall of Fame. So I don't think that this idea is necessarily the best one, but I wanted to give it to you guys because maybe some people did really like that idea. But that's the first one. Second idea. Create a separate second ballot that contains only players who cheated and vote on it that way. So basically, you have your Hall of Fame ballot with all of the, the players on it that, definitely didn't take steroids and all that stuff. And then you have a second ballot that has all of the people on it, like a Barry Bonds, like a Sammy Sosa, Mark McGwire, Roger Clemens, Alex Rodriguez, all those guys on there, and you would vote on it separately. This way, everyone gets a fair shake, and you can vote on them more based on credentials and more based on how much they meant to the game, instead of just blanketing everything. And also, they're going to have less competition, so it might be easier for people to get into the Hall of Fame that actually did deserve it, because you're not putting the steroid era guys and their numbers up against a guy who I think should be in the Hall of Fame eventually in Bobby Abreu, whose numbers don't look nearly as good when put next to Barry Bonds. Does that make sense? I don't know why I'm asking that. This is a podcast. You can't hear me. So, just comment down below if that made sense. All right. So, I think this is another flawed system. I don't think this is something that, I'm not sure it would work, but I think it is less flawed than the first idea that I came up with. I don't think it solves the problem that we have in terms of writers having a personal bias against somebody. I don't think it solves that problem because, a writer could still very easily not vote for somebody. And also, I think a lot of the writers probably just wouldn't vote on that ballot. Which, by the way, that is legal. There are writers that have not voted for years because they are protesting the steroid era or whatever the case may be. You are legally allowed, if you are a baseball writer, to not vote for anyone, not even turn in a ballot, or you could just turn in a blank ballot. There's no rules against. There's probably some rules, but in terms of those, you can do that. You can just not turn in a ballot, or you can turn in a blank ballot. And I think a lot of writers would probably just end up doing that instead. But again, I think it gives the writers a chance to more accurately tell the story of the game of baseball, at least in their terms. And I think it's different enough that some of the writers would probably be happy with it. But again, it's flawed and probably not harsh enough to the actual players, because they're still getting into the Hall of Fame and they are still treated somewhat the same as other players. They're just kind of put on a separate ballot. But once they get into the Hall of Fame, there wouldn't be any difference between them. So I don't think that this one would work either. But again, some of you might like that idea, so I wanted to present that. Third idea. Very similar to the first one, but I think it improves on it. Create an entire asterisk wing of the Hall of Fame that doesn't just include steroid era guys, but it includes everyone who cheated the game in some way. Just make it a big asterisk wing of the Hall of Fame. This does solve some of the problems that the first idea that I presented had. You know, it includes all the modern sluggers and it evens things out between the two parties. It does take other troubled players such as Pete Rose and such as Curt Schilling, who also did not make it into the Hall of Fame on this past ballot. Takes those guys into account. And honestly, it still does all of the positives that I talked about in the steroid era wing idea. It does all of the same positives that I talked about in that one. You know, it still talks about, you know, Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, McGwire, Sosa. You know, they could all get in. You know, so like guys like that in terms of telling the story of baseball. You know, I think that it does tell a lot of the positive things that the first idea did, but improves upon them. And again, this idea to me, it's a little better. And I think that this could be something that honestly unites a lot of the fan base because, you know, there are people that think that there just shouldn't be any place in the Hall of Fame. But if you are going to have a place in the Hall of Fame, it might as well be a place that literally is an asterisk. Like, you are an asterisk to the game of baseball, and you will be permanently enshrined into being an asterisk in the Hall of Fame. I think that some people, even on that far, far side that think none of them should get in the Hall of Fame, I think some of them might actually go for this idea because of the severity of it. And again, I think that those who believe that certain players should be allowed in will get their wish, but it would be associated with an asterisk. So, you know, they'll be punished forever because I'll tell you this. If I am given the choice between going into the Hall of Fame in the asterisk wing and not going into the Hall of Fame at all, I personally would not want to go in. I don't want an asterisk being by my name for the rest of my life. Even if people are already saying it. I don't want that permanent thing happening to me. So I would choose to not be in the Hall of Fame at all. And I'm sure that there are people that would probably agree with me. I'm sure a lot would disagree, but that's totally fine. But for me, I definitely don't want to be associated with that. So I think for some players, that's punishment enough to be associated with an asterisk for the rest of their lives. But none of this is to say that this doesn't have its own set of limitations. And I think the biggest of which is that it doesn't necessarily differentiate between the severity of the asterisk, which is kind of odd to say, but you know, it does kind of make sense when you think about it. I mean, you know, I guess it could be kind of implied or written in some way. You know, I'm not sure how that would work. But, you know, I think it doesn't, you know, differentiate between what Pete Rose did and what Barry Bonds did. You know, they're both different players, but they're both, I think, equally important to the game of baseball in terms of telling the story of it. But it doesn't differentiate between what Pete Rose did, which was being caught gambling and being caught betting on games, versus Barry Bonds, who may or may not have taken steroids. He did. But, you know, you get what I'm trying to say. So it doesn't really differentiate between those two things. And also, another issue is, where do you stop? You know, where does the asterisk part stop for this? Is David Ortiz in the asterisk wing because he technically tested positive for steroids in 2003, or at least his name was in it? How about Bagwell and Pudge? Are they in there? Even though they never got caught, never even had their names thrown out there, but they just played in that era, so maybe you just assume? Like, are they put in there just in case they actually did take steroids? Or do you have to have some kind of proof? And if you have to have some kind of proof, then what are we doing with Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens? Like, where does it stop? Where does it end? Can you take someone out of the asterisk wing of the Hall of Fame? Or put someone in if more evidence comes out that proves their innocence or proves their guilt? You know, where does it end? Where does it stop? And I think that, you know, it's a slippery slope that if it's handled properly, it can work. But again, it is a slippery slope, and if it's not handled properly, it could be bad. It could get really, really murky and really muddy. But I do think it is something that could work, again, if handled properly. So that is an idea that I wanted to present. And here is the last idea that I want to present. I want to talk about kind of changing the ballot around. And I think that this is the most complicated idea that I have. And it requires the most moral discipline out of the writers. And also the most openness and also the most honesty out of the writers. But, again, I've said this a few times, if handled properly, I think that this idea could work the best. And I think that this idea could be what really turns things around. It's going to sound pretty simple on the surface, but it is anything but, I promise you. So here is my last idea. My last idea is to put different parameters in place for those who cheated and judge them strictly based off of these parameters when voting for the Hall of Fame. Like I said, it sounds simple. It's not making an entire new wing of the Hall of Fame. It's not creating a separate ballot. It's just changing the parameters around for someone who either definitely cheated or allegedly cheated. And I think it's important to note that some of the parameters, and I am going to discuss what the parameters are here in a second, some of the parameters are going to be the exact same as parameters of regular players. You know, you're going to have to look at their stats. You're going to have to look at all that kind of stuff. But they are going to have different twists on them in terms of the parameters. And obviously, there's going to be some completely different parameters that players who didn't cheat wouldn't have to deal with. Obviously, ethical questions, different things like that. And these parameters are going to kind of be a step-by-step process that the writer would walk through, and the writers as a whole would walk through when they have to vote on one of these players. And each player that goes through this process has to pass each of these parameters and pass all of the tests. And if they do pass all the tests, and here's the difference. If you do pass all the tests, you are automatically in. There is no individual vote. So here is what that would kind of look like. So you go down the ballot, Bobby Abreu, normal player, you vote normally as individuals. And then there is a separate little thing that contains all of the people on the ballot that cheated the game in some way. So, for instance, this year, you would have Barry Bonds, you would have Roger Clemens, you would have Mark McGwire, you would have Sammy Sosa, you would have Gary Sheffield, Manny Ramirez, Alex Rodriguez. You would take all those guys and you would go through this process with them as a complete team of writers, and if they pass the parameters, then they are in, and it is not up to an individual vote. Because again, I am trying to take personal bias completely out of it, because it's not fair to have a personal bias towards specific players or against specific players. So here is the parameters. Or I should say, here are the parameters. And these are the parameters for people who took steroids or other PEDs. There are going to be separate parameters for those who didn't. I promise they'll be very short. So, for now, I'm just going to focus on people who did steroids or other PEDs. Here is the first parameter. Was this player a Hall of Famer before steroids, after steroids, and or without steroids? That is the first question. If the answer is yes, you move on to the next parameter. So, this is only going to eliminate a few people probably. So, a guy like Mark McGwire and a guy like Sammy Sosa. You look at their careers, they are basically only associated with steroids, right? They're almost their entire careers, they took steroids. Before they took steroids, they were not very good players. And after they took steroids, they were not very good players. Therefore, they will be disqualified from contention into the Hall of Fame. Because steroids, you can argue, was the main reason for their success. So, guys like that would not be allowed in. But guys like Barry Bonds, guys like Roger Clemens, who were Hall of Famers before, during, after everything in terms of steroids. They were Hall of Famers, bar none. Bonds and Clemens were shoo-ins before and after steroids. And even guys like Manny Ramirez and Alex Rodriguez careers were honestly, only minorly probably affected by steroids. So they would move on to the next round too. And then obviously, if the answer is no to any of these questions, like it would be for Mark McGwire or Sammy Sosa in this case, they are eliminated. But if the answer is yes, they move on. So Bonds, Clemens, Manny Ramirez, Alex Rodriguez, they move on right now. Second parameter is, can you tell the story of baseball without this player? That is the second parameter. So again, first parameter is, was this person a Hall of Famer before steroids, after steroids, and or without them? That's the first one. Second parameter, can you tell the story of baseball without this player? This is honestly an area where a guy like Mark McGwire or a guy like Sammy Sosa would shine if they made it to this round, but they didn't make it to this round. Because you can't really tell the story of Major League Baseball without Mark McGwire or Sammy Sosa, but there are going to have to be guys that don't make it. And this, humbly and admittedly would probably be the hardest part for the writers to agree on. Because this is the only section of these parameters that is subjective. And it's kind of hard to quantify, can you tell the story of baseball with or without a certain player? Now, it's not necessarily like that for every player. Some are very cut and dry. You absolutely cannot tell the story of baseball without Barry Bonds and without Roger Clemens. But you can probably talk about the story of baseball without mentioning a guy like Jeff Kent or Fred McGriff, both of which who are on the ballot this year. And again, this is no disrespect to Jeff Kent, no disrespect to Fred McGriff, both fantastic baseball players, but their names are not essential to the game of baseball. When I tell the history of the game of baseball, I'm not going to talk about Jeff Kent, and I'm not going to talk about Fred McGriff. The only reason I would ever even talk about about Jeff Kent, honestly, is because him and Barry Bonds hated each other. That's really the only reason I would probably talk about Jeff Kent in terms of the story of baseball. Now, guys like Manny Ramirez and Alex Rodriguez, those are a lot harder. Can you tell the story of baseball without Manny Ramirez? Manny left a mark on the game by being, Manny. I mean, literally, his mark on the game was Manny being Manny above mostly just about everything else. He was a multiple-time World Series champion. He was a World Series MVP, 12-time All-Star, 9-time Silver Slugger. Yes, all that is true, but more well-known for being, again, Manny. So can you say that he left enough of an impact on the game with his numbers and with his stats and with him being Manny? Some people would say absolutely. Some people would say probably not. I don't know. It depends on the person. It's very subjective in terms of Manny Ramirez. What about A-Rod? Statistically, I'm going to be honest. I'm serious, guys. Look up Alex Rodriguez's stats. If you're going to look at any stat if you have to look at one stat to quantify how good a hitter somebody was, OPS, you could do a lot worse than OPS. OPS is on base plus slugging. So it's how much did you get on base, and also how much power did you have? How many extra base hits did you have? How many home runs did you have? Like, how much of an impact are you making on the game in terms of that? In terms of your power, in terms of getting on base. That's a stat that really shows you how dominant a guy was. Alex Rodriguez has the highest OPS of any shortstop in history. And he also has the highest OPS of every third baseman in history. So, statistically speaking, even if you're just looking at that one stat, even if you completely ignore the counting stats and everything like that, and longevity, he has a case to say he is the best offensive shortstop and best offensive third baseman in history. I'm dead serious. Like, he left, in terms of statistics, he left a mark on the game that is undeniable. Undeniable. 696 home runs, almost 700 home runs, a World Series champion, 3-time MVP. Numbers don't lie. A-Rod is one of the best players statistically to ever do it. That is undeniable. But again, I don't know if that's enough to say that you can't tell the story of baseball without or with Alex Rodriguez or without him. And it might not be enough. So a lot of people would say it is enough. You cannot tell the story of baseball without A-Rod. But a lot of people say you can. So it's really, really tough, especially with those two. So again, this area might be the fatal flaw. It might be the reason that this whole thing crumbles. But for simplicity's sake, let's say both A-Rod and Manny move on to the next parameters so that I can I can finish out these parameters so that it makes more sense. Now we're going to move on to the final parameter, the final questions that you have to ask to get them into the Hall of Fame. The final and most important to me parameter is you must ask these questions. When these players or this player allegedly took steroids, or other PEDs, of course, were players being tested at the time of use? If yes, did they do it knowingly after testing was implemented? And did they for sure test positive? If the answer is yes to either of those questions, or I should say to both of those questions, they should be eliminated from contention. And if the answer is no to either of these questions, then guess what? You move on. Already, you see in those two questions, guys like A-Rod, guys like Manny Ramirez are gone. They are not allowed in. That's why I was very comfortable moving them onto this round, because I knew with the parameters, they would not make it. They would not make it. Because, for those of you who don't know, Alex Rodriguez and Manny Ramirez both tested positive for steroids when they were being tested for and when they were illegal. So that means Manny Ramirez and Alex Rodriguez both knowingly did something illegal when people were being punished for it and when there was testing, which means that they were a lot dumber than somebody in the steroid era who was essentially told that they would not be punished for it. So just go for it, essentially. So it's a lot worse for somebody in modern baseball to do it like when A-Rod did it than it would have been for somebody like Bonds or Clemens who did it when everybody was doing it. Not everybody, but a lot of people were doing it, and nobody was being tested for it. So again, that's why I was comfortable letting A-Rod and Manny go to this next round, because I knew that they would be eliminated. The next question is that since these players never tested positive for steroids during their career, or it was not being tested for during their career, is there any evidence that they actually did steroids when it was being tested for? If the answer is no, then congratulations. You are in the Hall of Fame. Woohoo! Congrats. You passed all the tests. So let's address a few things first. I know that some of this can be confusing. But first of all, at least to me, guys like Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens pass all the tests. Their steroid use all came during the era of baseball where players were not being punished or tested for it. And when, even though they did play for a short time in the league when it was being tested for and people were being punished, they never produced a positive test. So to me, they are in. Also, guys like David Ortiz, guys like Ivan Rodriguez, and guys like Jeff Bagwell are shoo-ins, of course, because they never tested positive either. And even David Ortiz's supposed positive test doesn't really hold water, because what happened was they were actually just supposed to be doing a survey of how many people were taking steroids and not releasing individual names. Because if enough people were taking steroids, regardless of who it was, they were going to start testing for it in 2004. And obviously, enough people were that they started testing for it. They were never supposed to release any of the names of the players because they weren't being punished for it. But years and years later, it came out that David Ortiz was one of the people that tested positive. However, it also came out that there were many of those tests that were fake positives or false positives. And again, since they weren't supposed to release any of the names, they say that it is feasible to believe that David Ortiz may not have tested positive during this time and that it was a mistake or a false positive. There is enough doubt at the very least to not really do much with it. But even if you wanted to do much with it, they weren't being tested for it or punished at the time. So Ortiz should be in, no problem. And second of all, for all of those who did not use PEDs, here are the modified questions that I said earlier. So instead of the bunch of questions that I had, the parameters would be, did they have Hall of Fame worthy stats? Same thing that you would do for a normal player. Do they have Hall of Fame worthy stats? Then, okay, they passed the test. And second, was whatever their offense was against a specific rule of baseball that is punishable? If the answer is yes, then they are also disqualified. So somebody like Pete Rose, gone, because they broke a rule that was already in place that was punishable and he was banned from baseball. So that is reason to disqualify him from the running. And if they did have Hall of Fame worthy stats, do they outweigh whatever they did? Or vice versa. Did whatever they did outweigh their stats? And if the answer is yes, then obviously they are disqualified. So I realize that this system is not perfect and it probably is a little confusing. Sometimes I'm not the best at explaining these things. But again, I realize the system's not perfect, and it could derail completely once subjective arguments start coming in. Are they essential to telling the story of baseball? But to me, and hopefully to you, it's better than simply letting a bunch of biased writers determine who gets in and who doesn't. To me. Again, and hopefully to you. And these writers, again, they seem to not have any consistency. They don't really have a plan. And they don't really care about telling the story of baseball at times. And this isn't all of the writers, obviously, but it's enough that it's affecting everyone else. And worse than all of that, they are taking it upon themselves to punish players for things that they weren't being punished for. Like, imagine this. Bud Selig, now obviously, Bud Selig didn't tell the players themselves to take steroids. Of course he didn't do that. But imagine you're a player at this time. And you basically know that, yeah, the substances are banned, technically. But Bud Selig isn't going to do anything about it because he knows he needs us. He needs us to hit home runs. He needs us to be entertaining. So I'm going to take steroids because it's going to give me an advantage and it's going to let me keep my job. And it's because it's going to help the game of baseball. Now, of course, not every player thought that way, but some probably did. So I'm going to, as a player, I'm going to take steroids because I know that I'm not going to get punished for it. And then now, 15, 20 some odd years later, 25 some odd years later, the player is not allowed in the Hall of Fame, but the person who let all this happen is allowed in the Hall of Fame. That's not fair. That's not how this should work. Either both sides don't get in or both sides do get in. You can't be willing to tell the story of the steroid era of baseball by letting the commissioner in, but then not allow any of the players that he utilized to bring this era of baseball to him and to the fans by not allowing them in. That's not how this should work. It's crazy to me. And it's not fair to baseball fans either, because now we feel stupid. It's like did we not watch Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa, two roided out meatheads smashing 60 home runs a year? And also, it's not fair to fans because you lose out on a very important lesson. You should appreciate the people who didn't take steroids during this time even more. Let me tell you, I did not fully appreciate Ken Griffey Jr. before looking into all of this stuff. How many people really took steroids during this time? How crazy it was. Ken Griffey Jr. was amazing during this time and never took steroids. And he was still one of the best players ever. During a time where all the stars were taking steroids, maybe not all the stars, but a lot of the stars were taking steroids, he didn't. People need to learn that lesson, to learn to appreciate those people more for making the right choice and being ethically right and not taking steroids. And without the people who did take steroids, we cannot learn that lesson. So we should let people learn that lesson on their own. But, as always, I want to know what you guys think. I think that, at the very least, the last couple of ideas are feasible and could work if handled properly. But again, I want to know what you guys think. So let me know in the comment section below what your ideas are, and I'd love to continue the conversation, either in the comment section or on Twitter. Anything that I can do to continue the conversation, I would love to do. But that's going to be it for me. I know I said it would be a bit of an abridged podcast. Turned out to not be, so that's great. We're not going to talk about the Celtics this week or any of the Boston sports this week. Again, because, it takes a lot to write all this stuff, and I definitely am happy that I got to share all this with you guys and be able to do this, and I think it went pretty well, considering I did a lot better than I thought I would, so I'm very happy with that. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time.
Hey guys, me again. I just want to say thank you so much for checking out the Lopes Goes Last podcast. It means the world to me that you decided to stick all the way to the end. That's super cool. So thank you again. And if you really, really like what you see, I'd love for you to subscribe, like the video, and share it with all your family and friends because, this is my passion project. This is what I love to do, and I really want the sucker to grow. And the only way that can happen is through you guys, is if you guys can help me out. So again, if you like what you saw, please subscribe, like the video, share with all your friends and family. That's the only way this is going to grow. And yeah, I'll see you guys next time.